I held the business license application in my hands, the paper trembling slightly, not from age, but from anticipation. At 62, I'd finally gathered the courage to pursue the catering business I'd dreamed of since my 20s. The kitchen had always been my sanctuary, the place where I transformed simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Now, after years of cooking for ungrateful family gatherings, I was ready to cook for people who would actually appreciate my work. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The application felt heavier than it should have, weighted with decades of deferred dreams and quiet sacrifices. I smoothed my gray hair back and adjusted the reading glasses that had become a constant companion these past few years. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman who looked tired. Too tired for someone who should be entering the most liberated phase of her life. "Mom, we need to talk." Will's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade. My eldest son stood in the doorway of my kitchen, his wife Maisie hovering behind him with that particular expression she wore whenever she was about to deliver what she considered hard truths. At 35, Will had inherited his father's build, but none of his father's warmth. Where Elijah had been gentle and encouraging, Will was calculating and dismissive. "Of course, honey." I set the application on the counter, covering it instinctively with a dish towel. "Would you like some coffee?" "This isn't a social visit." Maisie pushed past Will, her designer heels clicking against my worn linoleum. At 32, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, despite it being barely 9 in the morning. Everything about her screamed success, the kind of success that came from marrying well and knowing exactly how to leverage that advantage. Will pulled out one of my kitchen chairs, the same wooden chairs Elijah and I had bought when we were newlyweds. The chair creaked under his weight, a sound that had once been comforting but now seemed ominous. "We've been thinking about your living situation," he began, his tone the same one he used with his clients at the insurance company. Professional, detached. "This house is too big for you now." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Too big?" "You're rattling around in here all alone," Maisie added, her voice dripping with false concern. "It's not healthy for someone your age to be so isolated." Someone my age. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. I was 62, not 92. My mind was sharp. My body strong from years of managing this household, this family, this life that had somehow become less mine with each passing year. "I'm not isolated," I said carefully. "I have my gardening, my cooking." "Cooking for who?" Will interrupted. "You make these elaborate meals and then eat leftovers for a week. It's wasteful, Mom, and honestly, a little sad." The criticism stung because it contained a grain of truth. Since Elijah died 3 years ago, my elaborate Sunday dinners had dwindled to simple meals for one. But cooking had always been how I expressed love, how I brought people together, even if the people had stopped coming. Maisie moved closer, her perfume overwhelming the familiar sense of my kitchen. "We found a lovely senior community about 20 minutes from our house, Sunset Manor. They have activities, social programs, meals included." "I don't need meals included," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "I'm perfectly capable of cooking." "Of course you are," Will said, in the same tone you'd use to humor a child. "But wouldn't it be nice not to have to worry about all that? Think about how much easier your life would be." Easier? As if the things that gave my life meaning were burdens to be eliminated rather than gifts to be cherished. I glanced at the business application, hidden under the dish towel. 24 hours ago, I'd been planning to expand my world. Now they were asking me to shrink it to the size of a senior living apartment. "And there's the financial aspect to consider," Maisie continued, her voice taking on a practical tone that I'd learned to dread. "This house is sitting on prime real estate. The market is hot right now. You could sell for well above asking price." "This is my home," I said quietly. "Elijah and I bought this house when Will was just a baby. We raised our children here."
Exactly, Will said, leaning forward with sudden enthusiasm. And now it's time to let another family make memories here. Mom, you could help us so much with the down payment on the new house we've been looking at. Maisie's pregnant. Pregnant? I felt my anger deflate, replaced by a complicated mix of joy and something else I couldn't quite name. That's wonderful news. When we just found out, Maisie said, her hand moving protectively to her still flat stomach. We wanted to wait until we had everything figured out before we told anyone. The baby changed everything and nothing. I was going to be a grandmother again, Will's first child, though my younger son, James, had two daughters I rarely saw. But even this joyous news was being used as leverage, another reason why I should give up my home, my independence, my dreams. A baby, I repeated, trying to process this new reality. That's that's beautiful. Which is why we need to think practically, Will pressed. The house Maisie and I want has great schools, a big backyard for kids. But the down payment is substantial, Maisie finished. We've run the numbers. If you sell this place and move to Sunset Manor, there would be enough left over to help us secure our future. And you'd be financially comfortable for the rest of your life. The rest of my life. They spoke about it like it was something to be managed rather than lived. I looked around my kitchen, at the copper pots hanging from hooks Elijah had installed, at the herb garden visible through the window, at the cookbook collection I'd built over decades of marriage and motherhood. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, Will said, standing up. But don't think too long. The housing market won't stay this hot forever. After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen, the silence pressing against my ears. I pulled the business application from under the dish towel and smoothed it against the counter. The dream that had felt so real an hour ago now seemed impossibly naive. But as I read through the application requirements, proof of food safety certification, business plan, financial projections, I realized something. I had already completed most of these steps. The cooking classes I'd taken at the community college weren't just hobbies. They were credentials. The elaborate meals I've been making weren't wasteful. They were practice. The notebooks filled with recipes and cost calculations weren't the scribblings of a lonely widow. They were the foundation of a business plan. I reached for my phone and dialed the number I'd circled in the local business directory. Henderson County Small Business Development Center. This is Jean. Hello, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I'd like to schedule an appointment to discuss starting a catering business. As I made the appointment for the following Tuesday, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, excitement about the future. But underneath that excitement was something else, something harder and more determined. My children might think they knew what was best for me, but they were about to learn that their mother was far from finished making her own decisions. The woman who had raised them, who had managed a household through decades of challenges, who had survived the death of her husband and the gradual erosion of her family's respect, was not ready to disappear into the gentle twilight of senior living. I had one more fight in me, and this time I was fighting for myself. The application sat on my counter like a promise. Tomorrow I would fill it out. Tomorrow I would take the first step to reclaiming my life. But tonight I had some serious thinking to do about what I was willing to sacrifice and what I absolutely refused to give up. The Small Business Development Center occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house downtown. Its cramped offices filled with the dreams and desperation of would-be entrepreneurs. I climbed the narrow stairs Tuesday morning, my business application tucked into a leather portfolio that had belonged to Elijah. My hands were steady now, my resolve crystallized by 3 days of relentless pressure from Will and Maisie. They'd called every evening since Saturday, their voices taking on increasingly urgent tones. The house they wanted had another interested buyer. The market was shifting. Time was running out. Each conversation left me feeling smaller, more cornered, more desperate to prove that I still had agency in my own life. Mrs. Patterson, a woman about my age, emerged from one of the offices, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, her smile genuine in a way that made my chest tight with gratitude. "I'm Jean Sandler. We spoke on the phone." Jean Sandler led me into an office barely larger than a closet, its walls covered with success stories and resource guides. She poured coffee from a pot that had seen better days and settled across from me with the comfortable efficiency of someone who had guided hundreds of dreamers through the maze of small business ownership. "Tell me about your vision," she said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. For the first time in days, I felt myself relax. "I want to start a catering business, small events, intimate dinners, maybe some corporate lunch contracts. I've been cooking for 40 years, raised 2 children, managed every family gathering since I got married." "What's your specialty?" "Comfort food with a twist. Classic dishes elevated with fresh ingredients, unexpected flavorful combinations. I do a bourbon-glazed pork tenderloin that makes people weep, and my grandmother's mac and cheese recipe with truffle oil has converted more vegetarians than any argument ever could." Jean Sandler smiled, making notes. "Sounds like you have the passion and the skills. What about startup capital? The question I've been dreading." "That's complicated." I explained about the house, about Will and Maisie's pressure to sell, about the way my own family was treating me like a burden to be managed rather than a person with dreams worth pursuing. Jean listened without judgment, occasionally nodding in recognition. "How much equity do you have in the house?" she asked when I finished. "About 300,000, maybe more with the current market." "And what would you need to start the catering business?" I pulled out my notebook, pages filled with research and calculations I'd compiled over months of secret planning. Initial equipment, licensing, insurance, marketing, working capital, maybe 30,000 to do it right. Jean Sandler set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Patterson, let me ask you something. If you had a daughter in your exact situation, what would you tell her?" The question caught me off guard. "I'd tell her not to let anyone manipulate her into giving up her home and her dreams for their convenience." "Then why are you considering doing exactly that?" The simple question cracked something open inside me. Why was I considering it? Because Will was my son? Because Maisie was pregnant? Because it was easier to give in than to fight? "Because they've made me feel like I'm being selfish," I admitted. "Like wanting to keep my home and pursue my dreams is somehow wrong at my age? What's selfish about a 62-year-old woman wanting to build a business?" "Nothing," I said, the word coming out stronger than I'd intended. Jean Sandler leaned back in her chair. "I've been doing this for 15 years. You know what I've learned? The most successful entrepreneurs are often people who've been underestimated their entire lives. They have something to prove, and they're hungry in a way that comfortable people never are." She pulled out a business plan template and spread it across her desk. "Here's what I propose. You complete this business plan over the next 2 weeks. I'll connect you with SCORE retired executives who mentor new business owners. We'll explore financing options that don't require selling your house, and then you'll have real data to present to your family." You think they'll listen? I think you need to stop caring whether they listen. This is your life, Mrs. Patterson. You don't need their permission to live it. I left the meeting with a folder full of resources and something I hadn't felt in months: hope. But as I drove home, that hope was tempered by the knowledge that my family wouldn't give up easily. They had too much at stake, financially and emotionally, to let me reclaim my independence without a fight. The confrontation came sooner than expected. I barely walked through my front door when I saw Will's car in the driveway. He was sitting at my kitchen table, my laptop open in front of him, his expression thunderous. "What's this?" He turned the screen toward me, showing my browser history, the Small Business Development Center website, restaurant supply company catalogs, commercial kitchen rental listings. The violation of privacy hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my voice level. "You went through my computer?" I came by to check on you and saw it was open. Mom, what the hell are you thinking? Maisie emerged from my living room, a stack of real estate brochures in her hand. We found these too. You've been looking at commercial properties? The brochures represented weeks of secret research, dreams I'd been nurturing while they pressured me to surrender. Seeing them in Maisie's manicured hands felt like watching someone rifle through my diary. This is insane, Will continued. You want to start a restaurant at 62? Do you have any idea how many restaurants fail in the first year? It's not a restaurant, I said quietly. It's a catering business. Same difference. It's a fantasy, Mom, a dangerous one. Maisie set the brochures on the counter with deliberate care. We're worried about you. This behavior, the secretiveness, the unrealistic planning, it's not healthy. What's not healthy is the way you're treating me like I'm incompetent. Nobody said you were incompetent, Will snapped, but you're being impractical. You have no business experience, no restaurant training. I have 40 years of cooking experience and a lifetime of managing people and budgets. Cooking for family is not the same as running a business, Maisie said, with the condescending patience of someone explaining basic math to a child. I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic movement that changed the landscape of our relationship permanently. Get out. Will blinked. What? Get out of my house, both of you. Mom, you're being dramatic. I said get out. My voice was steady, calm, completely certain. And next time you want to visit, you call first. And you don't touch my computer, my papers, or anything else that belongs to me. Maisie's mouth fell open. We're your family. We're trying to help you. No, you're trying to control me. There's a difference. Will stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Fine. But when this business fantasy falls apart, when you lose money you can't afford to lose, don't come crying to us. I won't, I said. I promise you that. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the silence they'd shattered with their invasion. My laptop sat open on the table, violated but not broken. The real estate brochures lay scattered on the counter like evidence of a crime that hadn't been committed. I reached for my phone and dialed Jean Sandler's direct number. Mrs. Patterson, how did the family discussion go? There wasn't a discussion, I said. There was an ultimatum. Mine. I could hear the smile in her voice. I have a feeling this story is about to get interesting. What do you need? Everything. The business plan template, the SCORE mentor contact, the financing information. And Jean? Yes. I need to know about commercial kitchen space, the kind you can rent by the hour while you're getting established. I know exactly the place. The owner is a woman about your age who started her bakery business the same way. I think you two should meet. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of burning bridges. Will and Maisie had pushed too hard, invaded too deeply, underestimated too completely the woman who had raised children and buried a husband and survived every challenge life had thrown at her. They thought they were dealing with a confused old woman who needed their guidance. They were about to learn they were dealing with someone who had spent decades putting everyone else's needs first and was finally ready to put her own needs at the center of her life. Tomorrow I would begin building the business they insisted was impossible. But tonight I had calls to make, starting with my younger son, James, who might be surprised to hear from his mother, but had never tried to manage her life from a distance. The war for my independence had officially begun. James answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep, despite it being nearly 10 o'clock on the West Coast. At 30, my younger son had inherited Elijah's easygoing nature, but lacked his father's sense of responsibility. Ostensibly to pursue his photography career, but really to escape the suffocating expectations of our small Ohio town. Mom, is everything okay? The concern in his voice reminded me how rarely I called him, how our relationship had dwindled to birthday cards and perfunctory holiday conversations. I'm fine, honey. I'm sorry to call so late. It's not late here. Hold on. I heard rustling, footsteps, the sound of a door closing. Okay, I'm alone. What's going on? You sound different. Different? It was the first time in years anyone in my family had noticed a change in me. Your brother wants me to sell the house. Jesus, seriously? James's voice sharpened. Let me guess, he's found you a nice little senior living place where you can play bingo and wait to die. His bluntness was jarring, but accurate. Something like that. And Maisie's on board with this plan? I assume she's pregnant. A long silence. Congratulations, I guess. But Mom, that doesn't mean you have to fund their upgrade. The casual way he saw through Will and Maisie's manipulation was both comforting and infuriating. If James could see it so clearly from 2,000 meters away, why had I let myself be so confused? There's something else, I said. I'm starting a business. A business? He sounded genuinely surprised. What kind of business? Catering. I've been planning it for months, working with the Small Business Development Center, researching everything. But Will thinks I'm having some kind of breakdown. James laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in too long. Of course he does. Will thinks anyone who doesn't follow his 5-year plan is mentally unstable. Mom, this is awesome. Tell me everything. For the next hour, I found myself talking to my son in a way I hadn't since he was a teenager. I told him about the business plan, about Gene Sandler, about my dreams of cooking for people who would appreciate my food. He listened without judgment, asked intelligent questions. And gradually, I remembered why James had always been my favorite, even though mothers aren't supposed to have favorites. You know what this is really about, don't you? James said finally. What? Will's scared. He's always been scared that he's not as smart as he thinks he is, not as successful as Dad was, and now his mother, his 62-year-old mother, is about to start a business while he's still trying to afford a house. It's threatening his entire sense of himself. The insight was so accurate, it took my breath away. When did you become so wise? When I moved 3,000 meters away from our family's drama and got some perspective. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling more connected to my younger son than I had in years. But that connection also highlighted how isolated I'd become, how much I'd allowed Will and Maisie to define my world and my limitations. The next morning brought a call from Gene Sandler with information about the commercial kitchen. It's called the Shared Table, she explained. Leona McCallum owns it. She started her own catering business 8 years ago and now runs one of the most successful operations in the county. She rents kitchen time to new food entrepreneurs, and she's looking for someone reliable for weekday afternoon slots. Leona McCallum turned out to be a force of nature disguised as a 65-year-old grandmother. She met me at the shared table that afternoon, her silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her arms still showing the muscle definition of someone who'd spent decades lifting heavy pots and working long hours on her feet. The commercial kitchen was everything I dreamed of. Gleaming steel surfaces, professional-grade ovens, walk-in coolers, and enough space to prepare food for hundreds of people. It smelled like possibility. Gene Sandler says you're dealing with family pushback, Leona said without preamble as she gave me the tour. That's one way to put it. Leona stopped in front of a wall covered with photographs. Catered events, satisfied customers, newspaper clippings about her business. My daughter told me I was too old to start over when my husband died. Said I should sell the house, move in with her family, help with the grandchildren. What did you do? I told her to mind her own damn business and started catering out of my home kitchen. Leona's smile was sharp. That was 8 years ago. Last year, I grossed $400,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. 400,000. Food is never going to go out of style. People will always need to eat, and they'll always pay well for food that makes them feel special. The question is, are you serious about this, or are you just trying to prove a point to your family? It was a fair question, and Leona's direct gaze demanded an honest answer. Both, I think, but mostly, I'm serious. I've been planning this for months, even before my family started pressuring me to move. Leona nodded. Good, because this business will eat you alive if you're not committed. But if you are committed, if you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked in your life, it can give you something your family can't take away from you: independence. More than that, power. When you control your own income, when you have your own customers and your own reputation, nobody can make you feel small anymore. She showed me the rental rates, the shared equipment protocols, the storage options. Everything was professional, organized, and surprisingly affordable. By the time I left, I had a contract for 15 hours of kitchen time per week and a sense that I'd found not just a business partner, but a mentor. That evening, I was developing my first marketing materials when Will called. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I realized we may have come on a little strong. The carefully measured apologies set my teeth on edge. A little strong? We're just worried about you. This whole business idea, we don't want to see you get hurt. I'm not going to get hurt, Will. But the statistics, I don't care about statistics. The words came out harder than I'd intended. I care about building something for myself. A pause. Mom, can Maisie and I come over this weekend? We'd like to talk through some compromises. Compromises? As if my dreams were a negotiation that could win through superior tactics. What kind of compromises? Maybe you don't have to move to Sunset Manor right away. Maybe you could try the catering thing as a hobby while we list the house. See how it goes. The condescension in his voice, calling my carefully planned business a hobby, crystallized everything I'd been feeling into cold, hard anger. No. No. To which part? No to all of it. I'm not selling my house, I'm not moving to senior living, and I'm not treating my business like a hobby to make you feel better about your own insecurities. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, colder, more calculating. Mom, I think you need to understand something. Maisie and I have been helping you with your finances since Dad died. The lawn service, the house repairs, the property taxes. We've been covering a lot of expenses. The threat was delivered so smoothly, I almost missed it. Almost. Are you saying you'll stop helping me if I don't do what you want? I'm saying we need to be practical about resources. If you're determined to throw money away on this business fantasy, we can't subsidize that decision. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. They'd been helping with expenses, not out of generosity, but to create leverage, to make me dependent on their support so they could control my choices. I understand, I said, my voice calm despite the rage building in my chest. Thank you for clarifying the terms of our relationship. Mom, you're twisting my words. I'm hearing them clearly for the first time. I hung up. Within an hour, I was online researching reverse mortgages, home equity lines of credit, and every other financing option available to someone in my situation. I made a list of every expense Will and Maisie had been covering, about $800 a month total, and calculated how I could manage those costs independently. The numbers were tight, but doable, especially once the catering business started generating income. And if Leona McCullum could gross $400,000 a year, I could certainly earn enough to maintain my independence. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed business plan, Jean's Kitchen, exceptional catering for discerning clients. For the next 3 hours, I worked on the plan with a focus and determination I hadn't felt since my children were young, and I was fighting for their futures. Now I was fighting for mine. But even as I planned menus and calculated profit margins, part of my mind was already moving towards something darker. Will and Maisie thought they could manipulate me with financial threats. They thought I was too old, too scared, too dependent to call their bluff. They were about to learn just how wrong they were, and when they realized what they'd lost by underestimating me, it would be too late to undo the damage they'd done to our relationship. I was done being their convenient victim. It was time to show them what their mother was truly capable of. The SCORE mentor meeting changed everything. Randy Wilson was 73 years old, with the sharp eyes of someone who'd built and sold 3 successful businesses over 4 decades. He sat across from me in the coffee shop, my business plan spread between us, nodding approvingly as he read through my projections.
Your numbers are conservative, he said finally. That's good. Too many new entrepreneurs overpromise and underdeliver. But Jean, you're leaving money on the table. How do you mean? Randy pulled out a pen and started making notes in the margins of my plan. Corporate contracts. You focused on private parties and small events, but the real money is in corporate catering, lunch meetings, board retreats, grand openings. These people have budgets, they pay on time, and they're not haggling over the cost of appetizers. He was right. I'd been thinking small, thinking safe, when I should have been thinking strategically. How do I break into that market? Leona McCallum, she's already established those relationships. If she's willing to refer overflow business to you, you could be profitable within 3 months instead of 6. The possibility was intoxicating. I'd been planning for a slow build, accepting that I might struggle financially for the first year. But if Randy was right, if I could access Leona's network, there's something else, Randy continued. You mentioned your son is in insurance. Corporate insurance, right? I nodded, wondering where this was heading. He's probably connected to every major business in town. Law firms, medical practices, real estate companies. They all need insurance, and they all hold events that require catering. The irony was almost perfect. Will's professional network could be the key to my business success. You think he'd be willing to help? Randy's smile was knowing. Depends on how you ask and when. I understood I needed to establish myself first, prove my competence, then approach Will from a position of strength rather than need. It was a delicious reversal. Instead of begging for his approval of my business, I'd be offering him an opportunity to benefit from my success. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into preparation with an intensity that surprised me. I developed signature dishes, tested recipes at the shared table, created a portfolio of photographs that made even Leona whistle appreciatively. My bourbon-glazed pork tenderloin became a masterpiece of caramelized perfection. The mac and cheese with truffle oil looked rustic, but tasted like heaven. Leona introduced me to her photographer, a young woman named Rebel, who specialized in food styling. In this business, people eat with their eyes first, Leona explained, as Rebel arranged my dishes under professional lighting. If your food doesn't look incredible online, no one will hire you to find out how it tastes. The photos were stunning. My food looked like art. Approachable art that made you hungry just looking at it. Rebel helped me design a simple website, professional but warm, that showcased both my culinary skills and my personality. You should add a bio section, Rebel suggested. Tell your story. People want to know who's cooking their food. I wrote about my 40 years of cooking experience, my dedication to fresh, local ingredients, my passion for bringing people together through exceptional food. I mentioned my late husband, my children, my roots in the community. What I didn't mention was the family drama that had pushed me into this venture. That story could wait. My first paid event came through Leona, a 50th anniversary party for a couple whose regular caterer had canceled last minute. 60 guests, seated dinner, classic menu with elegant presentation. It was exactly the kind of challenge I needed. I spent 3 days preparing, working in Leona's kitchen with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Every sauce was perfect, every garnish precisely placed. On the day of the event, I arrived 2 hours early to set up, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was attempting. The party was flawless. The guests raved about the food. The hosts asked for my card, and I drove home with $500 in profit and 3 referrals for future events. More importantly, I drove home knowing I could do this. I wasn't just surviving in the food service industry, I was excelling. Leona called me the next morning. How does it feel to be officially in business? Terrifying and wonderful, I admitted. Good. Fear keeps us sharp. Now I have a proposition. The Riverside Medical Group needs a caterer for their monthly board meetings. It's a standing contract. 12 meetings a year, 40 people each time, continental breakfast, and gourmet lunch. Are you interested? I did quick math in my head. 12 meetings at roughly $1,500 each would generate $18,000 in guaranteed annual revenue. It was exactly the kind of stable foundation Randy had recommended. I'm very interested. There's one catch. Their insurance account is managed by Will Patterson. The silence stretched between us until Leona spoke again. Small world, right? When I mentioned your name, he said you were his mother.
My mind raced through possibilities, implications, potential disasters. Will controlled a contract that could make or break my business. He could sabotage me professionally while maintaining plausible deniability, simply choosing another caterer for perfectly legitimate business reasons. What did you tell him? That you were the most talented cook I'd worked with in years and that he'd be crazy not to hire you. But Jean, you need to know, he asked a lot of questions about your mental state, your reliability, whether this was some kind of midlife crisis. The betrayal cut deep, but it also clarified something important. Will wasn't just trying to control my living situation. He was actively undermining my professional credibility. The son I'd raised, supported, and loved was working to sabotage my dreams. When is the tasting? I asked. Next Tuesday, 10 o'clock. I spent the weekend perfecting my presentation. This wasn't just about winning a contract. It was about proving my competence to the son who doubted me. Every dish had to be perfect, every detail flawless. The morning of the tasting, I arrived at Riverside Medical Group carrying platters that represented months of planning and preparation. The conference room was filled with doctors, administrators, and board members. And Will, sitting at the far end of the table in his best suit, his expression carefully neutral. I set up my display with professional calm, explaining each dish, highlighting the local ingredients, and careful preparation. The smoked salmon canapes with dill cream cheese drew appreciative murmurs. The miniature quiches with locally sourced vegetables disappeared quickly. My coffee cake, Elijah's favorite recipe, elevated with Madagascar vanilla and a crumb topping that was pure architecture, silenced the room. Questions? I asked when the presentation was complete. Dr. Tiffany, the practice administrator, raised her hand. This is exceptional, Mrs. Patterson. The quality is obviously superior to our current caterer. What's your availability for monthly meetings? Completely flexible. I can accommodate any schedule, any dietary restrictions, any special requests. Will cleared his throat. What about reliability? This is a new business, right? The question was designed to undermine me, but I was ready for it. I've been cooking for 40 years and managing complex logistics for most of my adult life. I raised 2 children, managed household finances through economic ups and downs, and organized countless family gatherings. The only difference now is that I'm being paid for skills I've been developing my entire life. Several board members nodded approvingly. Dr. Tiffany made notes on her evaluation form. Any other questions? I asked, looking directly at Will. He met my gaze, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition that his mother wasn't the confused old woman he'd been describing to his colleagues. The vote was unanimous. Jean's Kitchen would cater the Riverside Medical Group board meetings for the next year, with an option to renew. As the room emptied, Will approached me. Mom? Can we talk? Of course. We stood alone in the conference room, the empty platters between us, like evidence of my competence. I have to admit, I'm surprised, he said finally. Surprised that I can cook? You've been eating my food for 35 years. Surprised that you can do this, the business side, the professional presentation. You were impressive. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, but it wasn't enough. Well, you tried to sabotage me. I was concerned. You told these people I was having a mental health crisis. His face flushed. I was worried about you. This whole business thing seems so sudden, so out of character. Out of character for whom? The woman who managed our household budget for decades, who organized every family holiday, every birthday party, every school fundraiser? Or out of character for the helpless old lady you've decided I've become? Will looked uncomfortable, caught between his professional admiration for what he'd just witnessed and his personal investment in keeping me manageable. We still need to talk about the house situation, he said finally. No, we don't. I began packing up my serving platters with efficient movements. I'm not selling my house. I'm not moving to senior living, and I'm not funding your down payment. I have a business to run. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and Will, thank you for the referral. This contract will give me the financial stability I need to expand the business. I couldn't have done it without you. The irony was perfect. Will's attempt to humiliate me professionally had backfired spectacularly, handing me both credibility and financial security. As I drove home, I realized that my revenge was already beginning, not through cruelty or manipulation, but through competence and success. My son wanted to treat me like an irrelevant old woman. Fine. He could watch while that irrelevant old woman built something he could never take away from her. 6 months later, Jean's Kitchen had become everything I'd dreamed of and more. The Riverside Medical Group contract had led to 3 more corporate clients. Word of mouth brought private parties, wedding receptions, and holiday events. Leona and I had developed a partnership where she referred overflow business to me, and I handled the smaller, more intimate events that didn't interest her anymore. The financial transformation was remarkable. From depending on Will and Maisie's $800 a month, I was now grossing $12,000 monthly and growing. I'd refinanced the house, eliminating the need for their help entirely. More importantly, I'd refinanced their ability to control me. The personal transformation was even more profound. I woke up each morning with purpose, spent my days creating beautiful food for appreciative clients, and fell asleep each night exhausted, but fulfilled. The woman who had been slowly disappearing into the background of her own life had been replaced by someone who commanded respect, earned substantial income, and built something meaningful from her own talents. But the most satisfying change was watching Will and Maisie's reaction to my success. They'd started with disbelief. When the first newspaper article about Henderson County's rising culinary star mentions Jean's Kitchen, Will called it a fluke. When I catered the mayor's daughter's wedding and the photos appeared on social media, Maisie suggested I was taking on too much for someone my age. Disbelief had given way to grudging acknowledgement when they realized the business wasn't failing. They'd stopped pressuring me about the house, though they still made pointed comments about my hobby whenever we talked. But now, as I prepared for the Henderson County Chamber of Commerce's annual awards dinner, a 300-person event that represented the largest contract I'd ever taken on, their attitude was shifting towards something that looked suspiciously like respect. And that's when they decided to try a different approach. The knock on my door came on a Thursday evening in November. I opened it to find Will and Maisie standing on my porch, but instead of their usual entitled demeanor, they looked almost nervous. "Hi, Mom. Can we come in?" I'd been perfecting the appetizer menu for the chamber event, my kitchen counter covered with notes and samples. "I'm working." "That's actually what we wanted to talk about," Maisie said quickly. "Your business." I stepped aside to let them enter, curious despite myself. They looked around my kitchen, once cluttered with their real estate brochures and senior living pamphlets, now organized like a professional workspace with menu planning boards and ingredient lists. "Mom," Will began, his voice carefully respectful, "we owe you an apology." The words hung in the air between us. 6 months ago, I would have melted at the first sign of acknowledgement from my son. Now, I simply waited for him to continue. "We were wrong about the business. Obviously wrong. You've built something incredible here." Maisie nodded enthusiastically. "It's amazing what you've accomplished. Everyone's talking about Jean's Kitchen. Dr. Tiffany from Will's office says you're the best caterer in the county." I set down my pen and really looked at them. Maisie's designer handbag was the same one she'd carried 6 months ago. Will's watch, usually pristine, showed scratches around the edges. Small signs that their financial situation might not be as secure as they'd implied when pressuring me to fund their new house. "Thank you," I said simply. Will cleared his throat. "Actually, we were hoping we could discuss a business opportunity." And there it was, the real reason for their sudden respect. "What kind of opportunity?" "Well," Maisie jumped in, "Will's insurance agency is expanding. We're bringing on more commercial clients, and they all hold events. Grand openings, client appreciation dinners, holiday events. We could refer them to you for a referral fee. Of course," Will added quickly, "a small percentage just to cover our time and effort in making the connections." The proposal was breathtaking in its audacity. They wanted to become my sales force, profiting from my success after trying to destroy my business before it started. The entitled assumption that they deserved a piece of what I'd built was so perfectly Will and Maisie that I almost laughed. How much of a percentage? I asked. We were thinking 15%, Will said. That's standard for referral fees. 15% of contracts they'd helped me secure meant 15% of my profit going to the people who'd tried to convince everyone I was having a mental breakdown, who'd threatened to withdraw financial support unless I abandoned my dreams, who'd gone through my computer and invaded my privacy. That's an interesting proposal, I said neutrally. Maisie leaned forward eagerly. We've already identified several potential clients. The Hartwell law firm is planning a merger celebration. Morrison Real Estate wants to do quarterly client events. And Will's biggest client, Riverside Development, is building a new office complex with a grand opening planned for spring. They'd done their homework. These were exactly the kinds of high-value corporate contracts that could take Jean's Kitchen to the next level. Will's network was more extensive than I'd realized, and Maisie had clearly spent time researching which businesses held expensive events. When would you want to start? I asked. Immediately, Will said. We could set up meetings next week. I nodded thoughtfully, watching their faces brighten with anticipation.
They'd thought they'd found the perfect solution, a way to benefit from my success while positioning themselves as helpful family members rather than the manipulative opportunists they'd proven themselves to be. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, Maisie said quickly. Take all the time you need, but don't wait too long. Some of these opportunities are time sensitive. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my success. Menu plans, client contracts, profit and loss statements that showed a business growing beyond my wildest expectations. Everything I'd achieved despite their efforts to stop me. I picked up my phone and called Leona. They want to help you now. Leona's laugh was sharp. Of course they do. Nothing attracts family support like financial success. They're offering to refer corporate clients for 15%. 15%, Xian! You're established now. You don't need them. Word of mouth and repeat business are already bringing you more work than you can handle. She was right. The Chamber of Commerce event would cement my reputation as the premier caterer in Henderson County. I had more inquiries than I could accept, a waiting list for prime dates, and the financial security I'd been working toward my entire adult life. But here's what you do need to consider, Leona continued. Your son has connections you don't. That Riverside Development grand opening could be worth $20,000. The question is, do you want to work with people who tried to sabotage you? Or do you want to build your client base through people who actually respect you? The answer was obvious, but I spent the weekend considering all the angles. By Monday morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Will called Tuesday afternoon. Have you thought about our proposal? I have, and I'm going to pass. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Pass? He finally said. I appreciate the offer, but I don't need business partners right now. The company is growing faster than I can manage as it is. But Mom, these are guaranteed contracts, high-value clients who would book you repeatedly. Will, 6 months ago, you told me this business was a fantasy that would fail within a year. You questioned my mental state to potential clients. You threatened to withdraw financial support if I didn't abandon my plans. Now you want 15% of my profits. That's not... We were just worried. You weren't worried, you were controlling. And now that you can't control me, you want to profit from me. The answer is no. Maisie's voice came through the phone in the background, urgent and insistent, but I couldn't make out the words. Mom, Will said, his tone becoming more desperate, we need this. The housing market shifted, our financing fell through on the new house, and Maisie's pregnancy is high risk. She might have to stop working. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. But your financial problems don't entitle you to a percentage of my business success. We're family.
Yes, we are. And when you're ready to treat me like family instead of like a resource to be managed or exploited, we can talk about ways I might be able to help you. But it won't be through a business partnership. I hung up gently, but firmly, then sat in my kitchen, looking out at the herb garden I'd expanded that spring. Basil, thyme, rosemary, and oregano grew in neat rows, providing fresh ingredients for the restaurant-quality meals I know prepared professionally. The garden, like my business, like my life, had grown beyond the small space others had tried to confine it to. I was no longer the woman who could be pressured into giving up her home, her dreams, or her dignity for someone else's convenience. Jean's Kitchen was more than a business. It was proof that it's never too late to reclaim your life, that competence and determination can overcome years of being underestimated, and that the best revenge against people who try to diminish you is simply refusing to stay small. Tomorrow, I would cater the Chamber of Commerce Awards dinner. 300 guests would taste food prepared by the woman Will and Maisie had tried to convince everyone was too old, too confused, and too impractical to run a business. They'd be there, of course. Will's insurance agency was a chamber member. They'd watch me command a room full of the county's most successful business owners, see me recognized for the entrepreneur I'd become, witness the standing ovation I'd earned through my own talent and determination, and maybe, if they were very lucky, I'd save them each a piece of my bourbon-glazed pork tenderloin, the same recipe they'd dismissed as the hobby of a lonely widow. But they'd have to pay for it, just like everyone else. Family discounts, like family manipulation, were a thing of the past. Now, tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.